Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the TFR Camp Colloquium. I would like to introduce to you Praneeth Netrapati. He's from Google Research India, and he'll be telling us about various facets of SGD, mini batching, acceleration, and dependent data. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nishant, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for attending the talk. So this is based on joint works with a lot of my collaborators, and so let me begin. So let me give you like a one slide high level overview of what the talk is going to be about. Optimization is an important component of large scale machine learning, and we may have heard that stochastic gradient descent or SGD is the workhorse of most of these large scale machine learning algorithms. And the good performance of SGD in practice is dependent on several aspects, including mini batching, where instead of computing the gradients using just a single example or one term, we use multiple terms. This is called mini batching. Then how do we do SGD over multiple machines? And then there is something called acceleration, which has been very widely studied in the context of deterministic optimization. So this is also used in the context of stochastic optimization, which speeds up convergence rates. And what are the learning rate or step sizes that we use in stochastic gradient descent? And how do we apply stochastic gradient descent when the data that we are getting is not independent, but rather dependent, such as from a Markov chain and so on. So many of these might not make full sense, but the high level point that I'm trying to make here is that there are several aspects to SGD that are important for its good practical performance. While these are empirically widely used, there has been little theoretical understanding about when and why they help, and what is the right way to use each of these aspects and so on. So our work does a thorough investigation of all these aspects for the specific case of stochastic linear regression. I'll explain like the problem of linear regression and so on as we move forward. But for now, I'll just say that in this talk, I'll not be covering all the aspects that I have mentioned here, but rather I'll be talking about only acceleration and how do we do SGD with dependent data. So let me begin with a overview of gradient classical optimization. And one thing, so if there is any question at any point of time, just please feel free to stop me and ask the question right away. I'll not have the ability to look at the chat window. Okay, so gradient descent is one of the most classical optimization algorithms, and the idea is that if you have a function f that we wish to minimize, then we start with an iterate w0, and then we move in the negative gradient direction grad f of w, and so the next iterate wt plus 1 is just wt minus delta, where delta is called the step size or the learning rate, times gradient of f at wt. Okay, and this has been very widely studied. And the problem that we'll be looking at in particular during this talk is the linear regression problem, where the function f of w is given by the L2 norm square of x transpose w minus y. So here x is a matrix and y is a vector. And we'll be considering the case where the function f is x transpose w minus y whole square. And this is a very basic problem and arises pervasively in many applications, both by itself as a subroutine in many other applications like solving interior point methods and things like that. And because of this fundamental nature of this problem, this has been deeply studied in literature. So if we apply gradient descent for solving this linear regression problem, the update takes this particular form where the gradient is given by x times x transpose wt minus y. And if we define f star to be the minimizer of the function, the minimum value that the function f takes over the entire domain, the goal will be to find a w such that f of w minus f star is at most epsilon, where epsilon is the desired accuracy parameter. Okay, and in this case, what we would like to understand is how many iterations of gradient descent that we need to make in order to guarantee that the eventual w will have only epsilon suboptimality. Okay, and the convergence rate, which is basically the number of iterations that gradient descent takes for obtaining an epsilon optimal solution, can be bounded by this quantity, where the condition number kappa is nothing but the ratio of the largest to smallest singular values of the matrix XX transpose. Okay, so XX transpose is a positive semi-definite matrix, so eigenvalues and singular values are the same, and kappa is just the ratio of the largest to the smallest eigenvalues or singular values. And the number of iterations, it can be shown that gradient descent takes in order to find an epsilon suboptimal solution for this problem is both upper and lower bounded by the condition number times the log of the initial suboptimality f of w0 minus f star divided by the target suboptimality epsilon. Okay, the log factors are not very important, but what is important is the pre-factor that's multiplying this log factor, which is this condition number kappa. Okay. A natural question is whether it's possible to do better by using some other algorithm than gradient descent. And the main hope to be able to do something better is that gradient descent does not seem to use any of the past gradients. So at iteration t, it is only using the gradient at the current iterate, right? And this intuition turns out to be indeed true. And there are more sophisticated algorithms which can get a better convergence rate. Examples include conjugate gradient, heavy ball method, or Nestrov's accelerated gradient method. And broadly, all of these are known as momentum methods. And yeah.
There's a question in the chat. So Dutika is asking, just for clarity, we don't really need gradient descent for this optimization, right? Since closed form OLS estimates are available.
Correct. Yeah. So the closed form expression will require you to do a matrix inversion of XX transpose. And that in general, so if the size of the matrix is, okay, so if X is a large, is a very fat matrix, then the time taken for computing XX transpose might itself take quite long. Whereas these iterative methods, what they can do is that if you only need a coarse accuracy, then the number of iterations here that you can see requires you to multiply only matrix vector product. So you only multiply X transpose with W and then X with another vector here. So the per iteration complexity of these gradient descent based algorithms is much smaller. And when you, especially when you want like coarser accuracies, these can be much faster compared to the closed form solutions. I hope that answers the question.
She says
yes,
thanks.
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So we were asking whether it's possible to do better than gradient descent in terms of this convergence rate. And we said that the answer is yes. And then there are these momentum methods which can indeed do better. So let's look at one of the most popular momentum methods, which is Nestrov's accelerated gradient. And the idea is the following. So instead of just having a single iterate at every time step WT, we have two iterates, WT and VT. And what the algorithm does is the following. So there are two sets of variables, and there are also two kinds of steps. One are the gradient steps, the other ones are momentum steps. So from VT, we take a gradient step, meaning VT, this WT plus 1 is a gradient descent step at VT. So we get WT plus 1. And in order to get VT plus 1, we take a momentum step, which basically moves ahead, so extrapolates on the line between WT and WT plus 1 further ahead. And then the new point is called VT plus 1. Now we have gotten WT plus 1, VT plus 1, and then we do the same operations again. And this is basically Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent. And in the same setting as earlier, where the condition number again denotes the ratio of the largest to smallest eigenvalues of XX transpose, the convergence rate now becomes a square root of condition number times log of the initial over final suboptimality. Okay. So in equations, this is how the update looks like. And so compared to the kappa log times this logarithmic term for gradient descent convergence rate, Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent improves the dependence on the condition number from linear to a square root. Because the condition number is always greater than 1, Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent takes fewer iterations compared to the standard gradient descent algorithm. Okay. And this is not just a theoretical improvement. Even on moderate problems where the condition number is about 100, we can see that the blue curve, which shows the performance of gradient descent. So the y-axis is the error on the log scale, and the x-axis is the number of iterations taken by the corresponding method. So gradient descent takes much longer, many more iterations as compared to Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent to reach the same level of accuracy. And it's important to note that each iteration of Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent basically only involves one gradient computation, and one linear operation. So in terms of total computational cost per iteration, it's basically pretty much the same as the standard gradient descent. However, in terms of number of iterations, the Nestrov's accelerated gradient algorithm improves a square root speed up over standard gradient descent algorithm.
Sorry,
Any
a
questions at this
quick,
point? Yeah.
yes, a quick question if that's okay. So this is assuming the same learning rate or individual optimal learning rates for both?
Individual optimal learning rates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and in case of accelerated gradient descent, there is also another parameter called momentum. So
Yeah.
there are two parameters, so optimal
Yeah.
parameters here.
So does it affect the stability of the algorithm, adding the momentum term?
Yeah,
is it-
so that's a good question. Yeah, it does affect the stability. So you can see this is kind of monotonically decreasing gradient descent, whereas the C is oscillating. So there are different ways we can talk about the stability question. So if the question is, okay, so there are various notions in which we can study stability. So one is, for example, stochastic noise in the gradient estimates. So this is not given to us exactly, but rather it's only given to us up to some, say, stochastic error like zero mean random quantity, or maybe in worst case deterministic error. So in those cases, it turns out that accelerated gradient descent performs much worse. But if we only care about not having a polynomial blow up in terms of this desired accuracy, then Nestrov's accelerated gradient descent can still be considered stable. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so let's so this is about standard optimization. So let's now come to a bit more detail about how optimization is usually done in the machine learning context. So usually we have something like n samples, or also called examples, x1 y1 all the way up to xn yn, say from a distribution drawn independently from some distribution d over rd cross r. So the x variable is in rd, d dimensions, and y is just a scalar r. And we can think of these, for example, as x being a bunch of weather parameters that we can observe, and y being something that we would like to forecast, for example, right? So this model, so when we want to estimate y in a mean squared sense, then we would like to find a w that minimizes over all of the training data. So this is called the training data, 1 over n summation over I xi transpose w minus yi whole square. Okay. So the eventual goal that we really want is not just to minimize the error on the observed samples, but rather have a W that works well on the entire distribution, the true distribution. But we don't have access to quantities that directly can estimate expectations under this distribution. We only have the proxy of these samples, and whatever we want to do, we should do with these samples. Okay. So gradient descent is not directly applicable because we cannot compute exact gradients because we don't know how to compute expectations here, right? However, there is a well-studied setting in which this can be studied, and this goes back all the way to Robinson Monroe's seminal paper, and this framework is called stochastic approximation, in which they also introduce stochastic algorithms for solving this problem. So the main idea is that, let's say we consider gradient descent, wherever we are using a gradient of f at wt, because we cannot compute grad f, we'll replace it with a stochastic version of gradient, which is grad hat f of wt, where the expectation of this random quantity is indeed equal to the true gradient, but this still has some stochastic noise. Okay, and like initial works only returned the final iterate, and there was a very well-known paper by Polyak and Judyski where they showed that returning the average iterate is a much better choice, and this is what we'll be looking at as well. So to be more, and in the context of linear regression, SGD takes the particular following simple form, where the gradient is given by this thing in the red, where each gradient computation requires a stochastic gradient computation requires only looking at one example xt and yt, and takes the time taken to compute this gradient is just linear in processing the input xt and yt, because we just have to take one inner product, one scalar difference, and then another scalar vector multiplication. Okay. So as we can see, this will be a streaming algorithm because we'll process one example at a time, and because of its extreme efficiency and good performance, it's widely used in practice. So we have just given a blueprint for how we can convert gradient descent into stochastic gradient descent. And we can do the same thing with any of the other algorithms like heavy ball, which will give us a stochastic heavy ball algorithm. For Nestrov's accelerated gradient, we'll get a stochastic version where the main idea is that you just replace gradients with stochastic gradients. Okay. Any
So
questions?
could I ask a question here?
Yes, please.
Okay. So given that so the population distribution is the DRD times R, which implies that if I'm understanding this correctly, that the gradient vector itself is then random, right? An expectation applies to the full gradient vector as well because there's a population distribution,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And so, oh no, sorry,
Yeah.
the next slide, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so the second line
Yeah.
of the expectation of gradient hat F, so that expectation is with respect to the population distribution and some other distribution
Correct.
which samples. Okay, so it's on a compound distributional
So
space where
yeah.
yeah.
So in this case, we're actually just considering a streaming algorithm where the algorithm looks at each data point only once. And because we have said that these data points are drawn independently from the same distribution, so if I process like the first 10 samples and I compute the stochastic gradient on the 11th sample, then that stochastic gradient is a unbiased estimator of the true gradient. For example,
Okay,
let's say I
but
fix W0 and I'll compute the stochastic gradient using this one on W0, then that will be an unbiased estimator of the gradient at W0.
that's fair. But so I guess what I'm getting confused by in the next slide is that the original gradient FWT is a function of the x's and the y's, which are random as well, right?
Oh, so F is just this expectation, right? And
F is the
it's not, so
expectation.
F is
Okay,
not defined in terms of
okay,
xi, yi.
okay,
F
okay.
is just the
Yes.
expectation.
Okay, okay.
This
That
is
makes
what we
sense.
are
Thank you.
really interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, okay. Got it. Thank you.
So let's now look at the convergence rate of stochastic gradient descent for the least squares regression problem. And let's first consider the special case where the model has no noise, meaning that there is a true W star such that Y is indeed equal to X transpose W star for the entire distribution for all the data points, right? And in this case, it's again not difficult to show that the convergence rate of stochastic gradient descent is condition number log initial over final suboptimalities. However, the condition number here is slightly different from the deterministic case. And here the condition number needs to be defined as the max over norm of x square divided by the smallest eigenvalue of the covariance matrix or the Hessian matrix of the objective, which is expected value of xx transpose. Okay. And in the noisy case where y is equal to not exactly equal to x transpose w star, but it has an additive noise term n, where let's say n is zero mean, then there is an additive term in the convergence rate which depends on the noise variance sigma square. So let me try to give a brief overview of how this result is obtained. So actually, before moving there, any questions on this slide about the result? Okay. Okay, so let me give you a brief overview of the proof. So Wt plus 1 is just Wt minus the gradient. So if we subtract W star on both the sides, we have like the distance to optimal point at time t plus 1 is the same thing at time t minus eta times this gradient, right? And when we use the expression for Yt as W star xt plus epsilon t, where epsilon t is the noise in the tth iteration, then this can be equivalently written as, so this green term can be equivalently written as this, where so this epsilon t is something that's standing out, which is noise, and the remaining part are multiplying Wt minus W star. So let me try to rearrange this. So what we get is that Wt plus 1 minus W star is some matrix with eigenvalues less than or equal to 1 times Wt minus W star plus a zero mean quantity, because this epsilon t is actually a zero mean noise. Okay. So just expanding Wt minus W star in terms of Wt minus 1 minus W star and so on. So we get this recursive expression, which when we expand it out, we get one term, which is depending on the initial term. This is in the blue, right? And which is being multiplied by some matrices, which have eigenvalues less than or equal to 1. And then there are these red and green terms, which are all zero mean. So in particular, when we take an expectation of this thing, the expected value of epsilons are all equal to 0 if they're 0 mean. So what we get is that the expected value of WT plus 1 minus W star is the initial distance to optimality, the optimal point, times some matrices which have all eigenvalues less than or equal to 1. Okay, and because these have eigenvalues which are less than or equal to 1, this will eventually converge to 0. And the rate at which this converges depends on the spectrum of this matrix expected value of xt transpose. Okay, and this can be seen easily using a spectral decomposition of this matrix. And we can also compute. So what this means is that WT plus 1 in expectation is going to be around W star. And we can also compute the covariance matrix of WT plus 1 minus W star. And this again can be done using a expansion of using this recursive expansion. And the remaining part of obtaining the convergence guarantee is just bounding these terms appropriately using the spectral guarantees that we assumed for the condition number. At least at a high level, I hope the idea is clear, even though I have not presented like the full details. Okay, so to summarize, we have seen that in the deterministic case, so gradient descent has a convergence rate which depends linearly on the condition number, and then Nestrov's accelerated gradient can improve this dependence to a square root. And in the stochastic setting, we saw that SGD, again, like classical results tell us that the convergence rate of SGD is something that depends on the noise covariance sigma square. Okay, and then there is another term which depends on the condition number, which is again linear. Okay, and the question is whether we can improve this convergence rate just like we did in the deterministic case. And firstly, it turns out that the second part here, which is dependent on the noise variance, is not improvable in general. And there are information theoretic or statistical lower bounds which show that this is the optimal rate. So the question then boils down to whether we can improve this dependence on condition number to something like a square root, which was done in the deterministic case. Okay. So is the setting clear and is the question clear? Any questions at this point?
So maybe just a quick clarification. So the right-hand column would be for the averaged, the convergence rate of the averaged, and the left is for the last iteration.
Correct. So in the right, actually, we'll not be doing a full average. We'll be doing what is called a tail average. So we can think of as we'll average only the last half of the iterates, let's say.
Sure, sure. Okay.
Yeah. So if we average everything, it turns out that we cannot get this log kind of dependence. We'll only be getting like a 1 over epsilon dependence, even on this term. Doing something like a tail averaging gets the best of both worlds, where you have only a logarithmic dependence on the initial error, as well as the optimal statistical rate in the asymptotic regime.
The idea being that if you take the tail average, you're in some sense assuming stationarity in the underlying Markov chain.
Not necessarily stationarity, but yeah, maybe you can say that the initial conditions are forgotten exponentially fast.
Yeah, sure.
And
okay.
Half of the iterations are enough to get you this log dependence, and the remaining, like this part, is the stationary behavior.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So the main question, for example, would be whether we can improve this dependence on linear dependence on condition number to say a square root, something like that. So the question is whether accelerating SGD is possible. And the first question is whether this is really important. And it turns out that it is indeed important. And
Praneeth,
the main reason is
there's another question. I think it's from the last slide. So he's Anurag Kumar is asking, why does the constant update gain not show up in the rate and the noise?
Constant update gain, meaning like the number of work per iteration?
I think the person who's asking the question would have to unmute himself. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I'll ask a question. Don't you have a constant gain multiplying the error term, the gradient of f plus the noise?
You're asking like this
In-
condition number doesn't
In
multiply sigma.
Robbins-Dolbeau, you have a gain, right? You have normally a decreasing gain. You have a constant gain here.
Yeah. So by gain, you mean like the learning rate?
Okay, you call it the learning rate. Fine, it's a gain.
Yeah. So this is for the average iterate. So for the last iterate, you have to take a decreasing step size, and so there it'll appear in the conversion, the final error rate. But here we are looking at constant step size SGD, where the step size zeta is constant, but then we average all the like the last half of the iterates and then output it. Does it answer the question?
Okay, so I don't understand this averaging, but normally in constant gain algorithms, the step size or your learning rate appears in the error, the final error. Maybe there's something which you are doing which removes that.
So this is very specific for least squares regression.
Eta.
So it is, yeah. So it is very specific for linear regression.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say this delta here, right? So it's
Yeah,
specific
delta,
for linear
right.
regression. For linear regression, if you average all the iterates, so you don't output like WT, you output 1 over n summation over I WI. So this gets rid of the dependence on delta. That's indeed somewhat magical, but this is specific for linear regression. So if you take any other optimization which is not a quadratic function, this does not turn out to be true. There will be a dependence on delta. And there has also been like a fine analysis of whether it's delta cube or what kind of dependence there will be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Right. So we were asking whether whether an improvement in this condition number factor is really important, and I was trying to convince you that it is indeed important. And the main reason is that even in deep learning packages like PyTorch and so on, so whenever people use stochastic gradient descent, it's often used with this momentum parameter, which is like using Nestrov's accelerated gradient. And even some of our earlier work has also shown that acceleration can lead to more parallelizability. So in this context, it's important to understand whether acceleration can be done even in the stochastic context or not. And there has been some work on understanding whether acceleration is possible with stochastic gradients, but the settings that were considered earlier only had what is called an additive noise, whereas what we will have in the context of like the streaming linear regression, for example, that I described, would have both additive and multiplicative noise. So I'll be happy to explain it in more detail if someone is interested. But the bottom line is that just because of the way it's used in practice, it seems important. It seems quite important. And earlier work does not consider the correct noise model which arises in this particular setting, but rather considers somewhat easier additive noise model. Okay. So let me now just give you a brief outline of a result before I go on to describe them in more detail. So the first question that we ask is whether it's always possible to improve the linear dependence on condition number kappa to a square root, and it turns out that the answer is no. And the second question that we ask is whether improvement ever possible, and it turns out that it is indeed possible in some cases, but it has to depend on other problem parameters. It cannot be like a black box kind of improvement. The third question we asked is whether existing algorithms can achieve this improvement by just replacing like gradients with stochastic gradients. It turns out that they cannot, and in fact, like we have lower bound results which show that they are no better than SGD in the worst case. And finally, we are able to design an algorithm which can indeed achieve an improved performance guarantee than stochastic gradient descent. And I'll briefly explain the algorithm later. Okay. So let me first answer the first question of whether acceleration is always possible, and I'll construct a simple example which shows that acceleration cannot be always possible. And the setting that we'll consider is noiseless setting, where y is exactly equal to x transpose w star for some w star. And in this case, we saw that the SGD convergence rate is given by condition number times log of initial over targets over optimalities. And an accelerated rate, for example, would be something like square root of condition number times the same log. Okay. So in order to answer this question in negative, we look at the following example where we have the x coming from a discrete distribution where x is the first standard basis vector with probability 0.9999, and x is the second standard basis vector with probability 0.0001. And in this case, the condition number turns out to be the norm of the vector is upper bounded by 1. So the numerator is 1. And the smallest singular value of the covariance matrix here turns out to be this 0.0001. So the condition number is on the order of 10 to the 4. And the question is whether we are asking whether a square root condition number log of this thing is possible as a convergence rate. And a simpler question is whether we can even halve the error when this log factor will be constant using about, say, square root condition number or 100 samples. And we can easily see from this example that if we have fewer than condition number of 10 to the 4 samples, with high probability we will not observe any of these x vectors at all, which means that we cannot estimate the W1 star direction. Okay. This suggests that we cannot do any better than condition number in the worst case. So acceleration is not possible for this distribution. And this means that this is not always possible to do acceleration in this sense. So any question at this point? Okay. So let's now look at a different example in order to understand whether acceleration is ever possible. And for this, instead of a discrete distribution, let's consider a Gaussian distribution with the same covariance matrix of 0.9999 and 0.0001. And in this case, it turns out that the condition number is again on the order of 10 to the 4, which is much larger than the number of dimensions, which is 2. Okay? However, after just 2 samples, we know that we'll get 2 linearly independent examples because X is sampled from this Gaussian distribution. So it's indeed possible to exactly find W star by even using this closed form expression. So information theoretically, it is indeed possible to find W star just using 2 samples. So acceleration might be possible for this distribution. Okay. So the answer to the second question seems like the answer is yes, but it has to depend on something else. And it turns out this other problem parameter, what really matters here is what is the number of samples required for matrix spectral concentration. So to be more precise, let's say we have xi coming from some xi being random vectors coming from some distribution, and let's say h is the covariance matrix of the distribution. What we really need for the information theoretic argument to go through based on the OLS estimate is that the empirical covariance matrix 1 over n summation I equal to 1 to n xi xi transpose, right? This is the empirical covariance matrix. This has to be close to the true covariance matrix. Okay. Or in other words, the spectral norm of the difference between the empirical and true covariance matrices is small. And how many samples n are required to be able to guarantee this? And this is a question that's well studied in the random matrix theory literature. And one of the standard notions of characterizing the sample complexity required for this is what's called matrix variance. And in the context of linear regression, we call it statistical condition number. So the statistical condition number is defined as follows. So let me first recall what the computational condition number was. So we have this covariance matrix H, okay, and this basically determines an ellipse, and the largest eigenvalue corresponds to sigma max of H, and the smallest eigenvalue corresponds to sigma min of H. The computational condition number is the ratio between the norm of the entire vector in general divided by the minimum eigenvalue of the covariance matrix. Okay, and the statistical condition number, on the other hand, what it turns out to be is that we take the sum over all an orthonormal basis E of the norm of E transpose xi square divided by the norm of the singular value in that particular direction. Okay, so E here correspond to the eigenvectors of the covariance matrix. So what we are talking about here is the ratio of how much in general the vector can be in that particular direction divided by the expectation of the vector in that particular dimension. Okay, so and then we are summing over all the eigendirections here. So it is easy to see that the statistical condition number is actually less than or equal to the computational condition number because the sum of the numerators is equal to the numerator here because the e's form an orthonormal basis, and the denominator we are replacing this expectation by the min over all the possible expectations here, all the eigenvectors here. Okay, so it turns out that the statistical condition number is indeed smaller than or equal to the computational condition number, and accelerate. So this is a lower bound because of information theoretic arguments, and the upper bound is what we have here. So acceleration is possible only when the statistical condition number is much smaller than the computational condition number. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. Right. So in the discrete distribution that we saw earlier, it turns out that the statistical condition number is of the order of 10 to the 4 again, which is similar to the computational condition number. So there is no possibility of having acceleration in the discrete distribution setting. Whereas in the Gaussian setting, statistical condition number can be bounded by about 100, whereas the computational condition number is much larger by about 2 orders of magnitude. And here the statistical condition number is indeed much smaller than the computational condition number. So acceleration may be possible in this Gaussian setting. Okay. So in pictures, what we are saying is in the discrete distribution, this, okay. So the left plot is for discrete distribution and the right plot is for Gaussian distribution. The x-axis is the number of samples and the y-axis is the error in both the plots. The pink line here, dotted line, in both the cases tells us what's the statistical condition number in each of these cases. For discrete distribution, it's of the order of 10 to the 4, whereas for Gaussian distribution, it's of the order of n square. And the green curve is the performance of SGD. So we can see that SGD starts to drastically reduce the error starting from about here, which is of the order of condition number, which is again the same here. And there is not much gap between the lower bound here and the upper bound here, whereas there is much larger gap between the lower bound here and the upper bound here. Okay. And the question is whether existing algorithms can improve over stochastic gradient descent when the distribution is such that the statistical condition number is much smaller than the computational condition number. But it turns out that the answer is no. In particular, the way the heavy ball or Nestrov's accelerated gradient method are used, we can show a lower bound that is linear in the condition number, even when the statistical condition number is much smaller than the condition number. Okay? So in other words, these algorithms are no better than SGD in the worst case. And while we are able to show this thoroughly for the heavy ball method, same statement seems to be true empirically even for Nestrov's accelerated gradient as well. And I should mention that the lower bounds constructions that we use here come from fairly natural distribution and are not pathological in any sense. So for example, numerically, if you see, so this green thing for Gaussian distribution, we said there may be scope for improving like the convergence rate by shifting the curve to drop right somewhere here, right? But we see that heavy ball and Nestrov's accelerated gradient do not perform much better than SGD, which is in the green curve. Okay. So finally, the last question that we ask is whether we can design an algorithm that can improve over stochastic gradient descent, and it turns out that we can. And the convergence, so we design a new algorithm which has a convergence rate of square root of condition number times statistical condition number compared to the convergence rate of stochastic gradient descent, which is linear in the condition number. Okay. Since we said that kappa twiddle is always less than or equal to kappa, this is always an improved result compared to this one. And this has much better improvement whenever the computational condition number is much larger than the statistical condition number. Okay. So empirically, while SGD is in this green curve and stochastic heavy ball and Nestrov do not improve significantly over this, over SGD, we see that this red curve, which corresponds to the new algorithm that we are proposing, can get a order of magnitude improvement over both of these in terms of the convergence rate. Okay. And it's also important to note that we like the convergence rate of our algorithm is still much farther away from this lower bound, but we believe that we may not be able to design an algorithm which can use which can start a streaming algorithm which can converge right from here, but we do not know how to prove this at the moment. And one of the main challenges is that any such lower bound has to be computational and has to take account for the restrictions of the streaming algorithm, because the OLS estimate might be able to do well just starting from this point here, whereas what we are talking about is specifically about streaming algorithms. So just to recap, we saw that in the deterministic case, gradient descent has a suboptimal rate of convergence, and Nestrov's accelerated gradient improves the dependence on the condition number by a factor of square root condition number. And in the stochastic approximation setting, SGD again was known to have a convergence rate which is linear in the condition number, and we improved this convergence rate to square root of condition number times statistical condition number. This is always better than the linear dependence on condition number. And while all our theoretical results have been for linear regression, we have empirically implemented this even for training neural networks and other more complicated objectives. And this algorithm seems to consistently give performance improvements over standard vanilla stochastic gradient descent. Okay. So this is the first part of the talk that I wanted to, about acceleration and momentum. Are there any questions at this point on the topics that we have covered?
I missed what was the kappa tilde?
So kappa tilde is what we are calling the statistical condition number.
Yeah, I remember. Okay, fine. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So this basically comes out from matrix concentration. So what is the number of samples that are required for the empirical covariance matrix to concentrate around the true covariance matrix? Any other questions? Okay.
So we could
so
get
yeah.
upper bound is what you are saying, is it? The O
Sorry,
tilde?
can you?
You can
Yeah, O
only
tilde.
get
Sorry, yeah. We only can get an upper bound. We don't have a matching lower bound. So the lower bound is only kappa twiddle, which there is still a gap between kappa twiddle and this one. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah. So kappa twiddle lower bound is information theoretic, but we believe that if you account for the restrictions that are computational restrictions that are imposed by the streaming algorithms, we believe you cannot even achieve that lower bound, but we don't know how to prove it at the moment.
Oh, so matlab, like it's widely believed that the lower bound can be improved, but as of now, we don't.
Yeah, and I'm saying the lower bound will have to be computational. It cannot be a statistical or information theoretic lower bound.
In the sense?
In the sense that if you are allowed to do OLS, then you can meet that lower bound. But if you are only allowed to do a streaming algorithm, meaning with a memory of order D without D square, then you may not be able to do it.
I see. That's what you mean by numerical, in the sense like it depends on what kind of algorithm we are going to be implementing on.
Yeah. So if you put a memory constraint on the algorithm, you may not be able to achieve the information theoretic lower bound.
Hello, Praneeth. I have a question. I'm Chandramani from ISC. Am I audible?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. Okay. In learning problems, many times we encounter non-smooth regularization terms and objective functions. Do we know if accelerated versions are available for those algorithms, or what kind of gains we can expect?
So usually for non-smooth, you cannot really accelerate. There is no notion of there is no improvement. So gradient descent is known to be optimal for non-smooth convex functions, and you can do okay. So there are two ways you can do. So if you have something called a prox oracle, so here we assume that you can access the function through a gradient oracle. But if you have something called a prox oracle, then it turns out that you can again do acceleration. And for many of the simple non-smooth regularizers like L1 regularization or nuclear norm regularization, such prox operators can be implemented. So for them, there is a way to do acceleration. For other non-smooth functions, you usually can smooth the function by what is known as, say, either Gaussian smoothing or Morrow envelope smoothing, and you can apply accelerated gradient algorithms there. You can obtain better rates in terms of maybe number of projections for constraint optimization and so on in the worst case. So there are matching lower bounds which show that you cannot do any better using acceleration. Does it make sense?
Oh yeah. So I have a quick follow-up question. This stochastic optimization is also related to online convex optimization. So I wonder if we can have accelerated algorithms to that fetch better regret bounds. In convex optimization setting.
Yeah. So there is a relation from a technical point of view, but I don't think it's explicit.
Okay.
You can obtain better regret guarantees using something called predictable sequences. And when you can kind of predict what is going to come next in the online convex optimization setting, and that is related to accelerated methods from a technical point of view in terms of convergence rates, but I don't like know of like an equivalence.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. So in the remaining 10 minutes or so let me quickly present some of like the other direction that I described, which is learning with dependent data. So the main motivation is that, so in the previous setting, we assume that we are getting independent samples from the same distribution, whereas here we are going to consider a setting where the data is coming from a Markov chain, and so they are not really independent. Okay. So examples of learning with dependent data arise in, say, time series forecasting, reinforcement learning, and so on. And usually the data is modeled as coming from a Markov chain or Markov decision process. And we wish to again design streaming or SGD style algorithm for this thing. So more concretely, the function that we want to minimize, so here we are using L for the function. So is the expected value where x, y come from a distribution pi, and the loss function is again like x transpose w minus y whole square. Okay, so this is linear regression again, where and x, y again come from some distribution, but we don't observe independent samples from pi, but rather we observe x1, y1, x2, y2 all the way, right? Which are evolving from as a Markov chain, and pi is a stationary distribution of this Markov chain. So is the setting clear? The difference of the previous this one. So there we were getting independent samples from the stationary distribution, whereas for which pi is the stationary distribution, where wt plus 1 is just wt minus the step size times. And because wt is dependent on all the past xt all the way up to xt minus 1/1, the gradient here is biased, meaning that the expectation of this thing is no longer equal to the gradient where the of the loss function, where the loss function is defined to be this expectation. Okay. And because of the importance of and like naturalness of this problem, there has been significant amount of work on analyzing SGD or designing new SGD style algorithms for this problem. But most of the works only give asymptotic results, and the best known non-asymptotic results match a simple baseline. So in order to present this simple baseline, I need to introduce the concept of mixing time of a Markov chain. So let's say Z1, Z2, and so on is a Markov chain evolving in this fashion, and pi b its stationary distribution. The mixing time and this 1/4 is somewhat arbitrary and can be replaced by any other constant, and the resulting mixing time will again change by some constant factors, but we can just use 1/4 for like simplicity here. Okay. And the main idea about mixing time is that it tells us how fast the Markov chain forgets the initial conditions Z1. Okay. Okay. So let's come back to the problem that we are looking at, where we want to minimize this objective function, where we are getting samples from a Markov chain evolving like sequential samples from a Markov chain, right? So the main idea is this. So if tau mix is the mixing time of the Markov chain, then we just take one every tau mix number of samples, and by the definition of mixing time, these samples are approximately independent, and we can use standard SGD results to just analyze SGD on these samples. But because we are only taking one sample out of every tau mix number of samples, the number of effective samples that we are here is n over tau mix.
Praneeth,
and it turns out that the best known results are no better than this baseline. Yeah.
You're breaking up quite a bit. So a part of what you said in the last few minutes wasn't clear at all.
Okay. So this slide or
So even the earlier slides, but yeah, perhaps this is a good slide to start.
Sounds good. So yeah, so let me begin. So this was motivation. So let me directly jump to the problem formulation. So the formulation is the following. So here our objective function is again given by the expected value over xy in some distribution. And this function is just the least squares function on the given samples. Okay. Except that in the previous setting, we assume that xi, yi are coming. So we are given samples independently sampled from this distribution. Whereas here we are saying that we're getting samples that are observed from a Markov chain and pi is its stationary distribution. Okay. Is the setting clear?
Did you change slides, or we are still on the mixing time of Markov chains slide here?
Yeah, I did change the slide.
Okay, we didn't notice it.
So let me.
It didn't change for us.
Let me stop sharing and then reshare again. How about now?
I don't see anything. I just see, yeah, maybe you can share again. Maybe I can pause recording for the time being.
The setting here is the following. So we are again trying to minimize least squares objective x transpose w minus y whole square, where x and y are coming from some distribution pi. Except that instead of observing independent samples from this distribution pi, what we are seeing is x1, y1, x2, y2, and so on, evolving as a Markov chain, for which pi is the stationary distribution. Okay. Earlier, is the setting clear?
Pranit, you broke up again. In fact, your screen is also frozen. But I think we could all see the slides, so perhaps it is okay to proceed. You have another couple of minutes. Could you, will it be possible for you to wrap up within that?
Okay. So now that I have explained like the mixing time of Markov chain, so the simple baseline is that for the least square problem and under the realizability assumption where y is indeed equal to w star.
Pranit, we completely, once you finished with the, you had stated what the problem is.
A zero mean random
Pranit, do you hear me?
variable. Yeah.
We don't hear you at all, actually. Ever since you
Hello?
stated, do you hear us now?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. So you broke up maybe a couple of slides earlier, and we didn't hear anything after that. So somebody suggested that if you switch off your video, yeah, we didn't see any of these results. So if you can switch off your video, maybe it will be a little better.
It's now better.
We can try.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So can you see the slides moving?
Yes.
Okay. So I hope the setting is clear. So, and I hope also that the definition of mixing time people would know. So the simple baseline that I'm saying is we can just take one every atomic number of samples so that these samples are approximately independent and we can apply the standard independent SGD results. And in this case, the number of effective samples is cut down by a factor of tau mix. So the convergence rate gets affected by this tau mix factor. And the question is whether we really indeed need to suffer this tau mix factor or not. Is the question clear?
Yes.
So it turns out that in a minimax sense, it is not possible, and we show that there is a simple linear regression problem where information theoretically the best convergence rate has to have this mixing time suboptimality compared to what you have for the independent setting. Okay, and at the same time, it turns out that under the realizability assumption, meaning that there is a true W star where y is equal to W star x plus a zero mean random variable, it is indeed possible to at least there are offline algorithms which can achieve the 1/n rate without any dependence on the mixing time. And the question is whether we can design a streaming SGD style algorithm that can achieve the same rate. And we indeed design such an algorithm. And I'll like the main thing I want to mention is how the algorithm looks like. So these green things and orange things are the samples in the forward order like this, right? And the algorithm does the following. So it takes a buffer of samples of the order of TOMx, and it processes the examples in the reverse order. So it will first process this example, then it will process this example, then it here. So it will just do SGD, but instead of SGD in the forward order, it takes a buffer and processes the examples in the buffer in the reverse order. So the first SGD step, second SGD step, third SGD step, all the way up to fifth SGD step. Then it leaves some gap so that the buffers are independent, and then it goes to the end of the next buffer and then traverses to the front, and then it leaves some here, and then it again goes to the end of the next buffer and traverses to the front. And the main result we can show is that we can indeed achieve this 1/n rate without the TOMx dependence for this algorithm. So I'll not go into the intuitions or the proof, but it turns out that we can also extend these results to actually design streaming algorithms for learning both nonlinear dynamical systems, and also can be applied to Q-learning for linear MDPs. And it has good empirical results. So let me just conclude. So I'll conclude by saying that there are several tweaks of SGD that are important for its good practical performance. And in this talk, we try to shed more light and design better algorithms using the concepts of acceleration and reverse experience replay. And there are several open questions which are interesting to understand following from our work. The first one is to extend our results beyond linear least squares regression. And the second direction is to go beyond standard optimization and consider more broadly about exploration, generalization, and so on, as to how we can do it with like dependent data and with streaming algorithms and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Praneeth. Let's thank Praneeth together for this wonderful talk. So please go ahead if you have questions or comments.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Shrikar.
I think somebody else raised their hand or started saying something. Okay, Dudika, you can go ahead, please.
No, please. All right, I will. Thank you. So a quick question. So how are you estimating the mixing time? Because I assume pi is in a general state space.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So we actually currently assume that we know the mixing time. We are not estimating it. But if we know the mixing time, then how do we do this is what we are able to answer right now.
Okay, got it. And so then the follow-up is, this is, I mean, the idea is a bit similar to maybe thinning in Markov-Chain Monte Carlo, where you essentially skip over dependent data points to get a gauge on approximately independent sub-data, right?
Yeah, so that I presented as actually a baseline where that will actually be sample inefficient because you are dropping a large number of samples. And
yes, exactly.
yeah, so we are not doing that, but rather, so the main idea is that if you actually process the buffer in the reverse order, then you will no longer have this dependency issue, and you'll not suffer this suboptimality in the rate.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
So my question is, you are showing this for the dependent structure. Dependent structure is basically Markov chain, But any other stationary weakly mixing or stuff like that will also like, have you tried, or is it only for the Markov chain?
So actually, we haven't really explored anything beyond Markov chains, but the key property that we use is just the mixing time property.
I understand. So which can also be then extended to other mixing stationary fields.
Possibly, yeah.
I understand. Okay. That was a question, because the only thing that you were using from the Markov chain was usually tau mix. So tau mix will be replaced by some other quantity which is reflective of the independent structure or the approximate independence.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. You have a Markov chain, then how do you do reverse experience replay? Is the Markov chain reversible?
No. So we store, say, 1,000 samples in memory, and we process them in the reverse order. So we need memory that enables us to store, say, 1,000 samples, and we'll process these 1,000 samples in the reverse order, and then we'll take the next 1,000 samples, and then we again process them in the reverse order. Is that clear?
No, but the distribution of the samples is different in the forward and reverse direction. So I don't know how does it work?
That's correct. It turns out that actually we don't really need reversibility of the Markov chain or anything of that sort.
Okay,
because let me put it this way. So the stationary distribution is the same, right? It does not matter. So when you go in the reverse order, it will no longer be a Markov chain. So that's true. But we actually don't need the Markov chain when we process the examples in the reverse order either. We only need the Markov chain to have this mixing time when we move forward in the forward direction. But we don't use anything specific about like the Markov property when we go in the reverse direction.
Okay, thank you.
One more question, Praneeth. Can you go to the slide where you had the summary of the stochastic gradient method and the determinant?
Yeah.
It was a 2x2 comparison. Yeah, here. I see. So D is a dimension, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So maybe this is not quite connected to the work, but I had a general question about the expectation, the randomness on X in linear regression, and how it matches with the typical conditioning on X in the linear regression model. So in the original data structure, the data distribution, the X and Y both are assumed random, right? So and in the typical linear regression environment, we're sort of conditioning on given X's what is the distribution of Y.
Right.
So is there a particular reason why the X's are also assumed random, and how does it's unclear to me if the MLE or the OLS estimates are exactly the same. Is the question clear?
Not fully.
So let me put it this way. So in like a typical statistical environment, you when you write the linear regression model, you say the expectation of Y given the X is a particular is the X is X beta or
Correct.
X W star, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the conditioning of X and so all the estimation and the OLS estimates and inference towards the end all rely on X being given to you as in conditional in the model. And
right.
So here in the original data distribution, X and Y both are assumed to be coming from a distribution. And then it looks like all the probabilistic setup also is with X being assumed, X assumed random. So how do the final inference being done in the resulting estimators, how does that change compared to what would be done in the typical linear regression model, where you have all the data together?
So I think the algorithm is different. So here we are looking at streaming algorithms where you only look at each data point only once. Whereas in the statistical literature, when you're looking at OLS, you'll access like all of the data together. And so that's one difference in terms of the algorithms. And even within the model, there are two different models. One is called realizable, where we are saying that X is coming from some arbitrary distribution, and then Y conditioned on X has this linear plus some zero mean noise kind of thing. Whereas, so this is called realizable, and most of our results are actually for realizable. But some of our results, particularly the acceleration one, can also apply to the non-realizable case, where XY can actually be from an arbitrary distribution. So we are not assuming that Y conditioned on X satisfies some nice thing, but rather we only compare the suboptimality of the objective value of whatever W we find with respect to the true minimizer of this expectation, whatever it might be.
Okay, I think I see what you're saying. Okay. Thank you.
Therefore, the question.
Sir, in the deterministic gradient descent algorithm, there are some step size alpha k you have defined. How do you determine that step size alpha k? Some trial and error or some algorithm?
Yeah, in practice, usually it's trial and error. Like you try different things, and then you can at least make some. So if the algorithm starts to diverge, it will be too large. So you can use some rules like this to kind of do a principled search.
Line search type thing.
Well, line search is like within the algorithm, like you'll be using different step sizes. But I'm saying even if you use a fixed value for every iteration, then you can try with something very large alpha, and then let's say it diverges, then you know that like you have to use a smaller alpha.
Okay,
and then
just maybe somehow you divide it and test it.
Right. Something like binary search for the step size, let's say.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any further questions from the audience? Okay, in this case, let's thank Praneeth again for the wonderful talk and the interaction.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the technical glitches.
No, I think once you switched off your video, it worked smoothly. So thanks
Okay.
to Dutika for this suggestion.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
See everyone next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.